Is Marburg as dangerous as we've been told it is?
Well, Sally, I don't think that Marburg is dangerous at all, and for a number of reasons. First of all, it's very, very difficult to contract it. So you need fairly close contact with people around you. So it's not like COVID being around in the streets. You're not going to have to mask everybody up. It's going to be direct contacts that will need to be isolated. And those contacts will need to then be treated. And there are effective treatment protocols, which we know about because we know that the one thing COVID did teach us was how to manage viruses that cause inflammation, that cause thrombosis and hemorrhage. Okay, so Marburg virus causes hemorrhagic fever, and everybody goes, oh, panic. And just like Ebola, people hear Marburg and they hear Ebola, and they go, what are we going to do? And they go into auto panic because WHO tells them it's incurable, and we have the same lockdown and quarantine and vax measures that have been suggested before. And that's not true at all. We know that these treatments work in Africa because we watch them work. So I'm going to just, Dr. Peter McCulloch, who yesterday said that the world has concluded that we cannot vaccinate our way out of future outbreaks with untested, unsafe genetic vaccines, which is what I understand the WHO are planning to do with the new Marburg virus. And our focus needs to be treatment, 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 early treatment. We know it worked. The new hydroxychloroquine data shows unequivocally that hydroxychloroquine was working in March 2020. And I'd even go back to another quote that we made, which was hit it hard, hit it early, and hit it with combination therapy. So here's the fear porn. The Marburg virus causes hemorrhagic fever. Up to 90% are going to die. A bat will inoculate something that will inoculate you. Your lymphatics get affected. And in this picture, your lungs, your spleen, your liver, your pancreas, your gut all falls apart. And looking at this very, very scary picture here, we see that our lymphocytes collapse and our kidney tubules stop functioning, and we have clots in our blood, and then we die, apparently. And no, that's not what happens at all. The virus doesn't kill the host. How does the virus kill the host? It doesn't. The virus enters, it replicates, it assembles, and it is released. And I will go through a picture of that with you in a second. You then get a cytokine storm, which causes huge inflammation. We know exactly how to manage a cytokine storm before and after COVID, but we're even better at it now. You then get clotting or thrombosis or hemagglutination. We have everything in place to stop the clotting. And if you don't clot, then you don't consume clotting factors, which means you don't bleed, which means if you control your cytokine storm, you don't get a fever. And if you control your clotting, you don't get bleeding. So there is no such thing as hemorrhagic fever if it is treated in the early stages. Let's go back to our friendly cytokine storm. The cytokine storm is initiated as an inflammatory response to the virus. So high levels of viral replication may initiate it. So shut down the virus. But the cytokine storm will also only initiate in a vulnerable host who is prone to inflammation. And Sabine Hassan has demonstrated beautifully in her microbiome work that if there's lots of bifidus in the microbiome, and if you have a healthy microbiome, you do not have a large cytokine storm. And what promotes a healthy microbiome? Zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D. We should be all on those three basic things every day. And anybody who is on those has nothing to fear from Marburg. People in Africa have a lot of vitamin C in their diets because they eat an enormous amount of tomatoes. They spend a lot of time in the sun. They have a lot of vitamin D in their diets naturally. Our soils are relatively zinc depleted, but our patients are now educated to take zinc sulfate, which costs about 0.5 cents a tablet. So we can actually, before we get to the cytokine storm, we put up the first wall against it. And that's before we've even started to treat it with things like colchicine and a lot of Shankara Chetty's antihistamines, which are all over the counter. So we don't need to be scared of cytokine storms. They are controllable. And I haven't even got onto the pharmaceuticals, because the best way to control a cytokine storm is a combination of silver and ivermectin. And that we've actually managed to demonstrate in a test tube. So
silver and what, Jackie?
Sorry,
I didn't catch this. I heard silver. I didn't hear the second bit.
The terrible vitamin I word, ivermectin. Naughty people. We've known ivermectin treats dengue since 2014 in the test tube. We know it treats Marburg. So getting back to this previous very scary picture, where we can see this person's got multi-organ failure as a result of the virus, when in fact they've got multi-organ failure after the cytokine storm. We go back to the bottom corner of the picture, and there tucked away is a picture of a clot, because that's what's actually the final thing that will kill patients. So what happens when you clot? Well, clotting factors are consumed. So platelets and clotting factors all go into the clot. And now you've got no more clotting factors left. We're talking day 20 into the illness. We're 3 weeks in now. We've had lots of time to treat this. This isn't happening in 2 days. We've gone through a viral replication phase. We've gone through a cytokine storm phase. We've gone to thrombosis. The D-dimer goes up. 3 days later, the patient bleeds. We've got 3 weeks to treat it. But when the platelets drop, that's when we see the terribly, terribly scary pictures, because the patient starts to bleed under their skin or through their membranes. So they show us pictures of subconjunctival hemorrhages where you've bled into your eyes and you're bleeding under your skin and you're vomiting and blood is coming out of you. And that has happened because you haven't treated it. Just like malaria. If you don't treat it, you're going to end up in ICU and you might die. Just like Ebola, just like COVID, if you progress to severe disease untreated, you are likely to die. And the whole point of management of patients in Africa is that we treat early so that we don't end up with a patient in hospital because we haven't got functional hospitals. Okay. So if we go back to it, how does the virus kill the host? Well, if we can stop viral entry, viral replication, viral assembly, and viral release, that's a start. Then we won't even get to cytokine storms and hemagglutination and clotting and bleeding and the rest of it. So let's go through. This is a filovirus. Both Marburg and Ebola are filoviruses, which means that they're kind of squiggly viruses with lots of glycoproteins, which you could otherwise call spikes. They are interestingly trimeric glycoproteins, very like the spike, and they behave exactly like the spike in that they use it to attach to a receptor to enter the cell. So if you can see my pointer, here is the virus attaching to a receptor, which is going to enter the cell. Now, at that point, if you've coated those glycoproteins with silver and ivermectin, it can't enter the cell. So now it hasn't even got past level 1, okay? If it does manage to enter, it enters into something called an endosome. So it's still not actually in the cell because it hasn't gone through the membrane and it's not in the cytoplasm yet. In that endosome, there is a lot of acid. It will acidify. And the acidification will break down the virus and allow the RNA to release. Now, 2 drugs stop acidification in the lysosome: hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, Zelenko's protocol. Hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and zinc. And this thing can't get into the cell, or if it can only do so in small numbers. So let's assume that we haven't given hydroxychloroquine because apparently it doesn't work, which we know from yesterday that it does. And we haven't given azithromycin And we progress because azithromycin has very, very powerful antiviral activities. And this is one of them. So it fuses at the membrane, which is at the bottom here, and it drops its little piece of RNA, its genetic material, into the cytoplasm. And now we've got RNA wandering around thinking, I need to make proteins and more virus so that I can reproduce. And it goes along to this complex here, which is a ribosome. Now, doxycycline takes out the ribosome. So now it can't make these proteins. But there's another complex here as well called RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which is a very long, complicated word. And all it is a photocopy machine. Okay? It's just making more and more copies of the virus. That enzyme is completely zinc, will be suppressed by high levels of zinc, and it will be suppressed by all the zinc ionophores, which Zelenko mentions: hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, doxycycline, ivermectin, quercetin. So it looks to me that this is becoming an increasingly treatable virus, and we haven't even got to the stage of just stopping the virus yet, okay? And then it'll carry on. It can't make proteins now because doxy stopped that. It can't make more scripts of itself, copies of itself, because ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and doxycycline and quercetin have stopped that. And it's pretty much been stopped on 4 different fronts, which is also why we go on about triple and quadruple therapy. So what do? At viral level, you coat the virus so it stays outside the cell. You stop the endosomal release so the RNA doesn't get into the cell. You stop the RNA from replicating, and you stop the RNA from translating itself into proteins, and you stop the virus. At this point, you shouldn't even get a cytokine storm. Okay? These are the points at which we can stop viral replication just with what we've got now, and it'll cost less than $20 US. You know, it's not hard. Here's your little friend Marburg under the electron microscope. You will notice that it's got a long piece of RNA in it. And unlike Ebola, which only has 1 curve or 1 fold, it has 2. And they are all your little spiky glycoproteins. And a glycoprotein is a spike. You've got the spike glycoprotein. I think this is GP140. HIV is GP120. Let's have a look at Ebola. This is Ebola, not too dissimilar, same group of viruses. It's called a filovirus because it's nice and long and stringy. And there it is in the bloodstream. These are not infections of the gut that make people vomit blood and pass blood. These are just like COVID. They're infections of the bloodstream and the endothelium. I'm going to leave that one out. So these are the pictures the WHO will show you of these people dying feverish with blood coming out of every orifice. And by the time they've got to this stage, you should have treated them 2 weeks before. So you have to understand this disease to treat it. So let's look at COVID. The WHO's idea was to give remdesivir in Ebola, where they killed 56% of people doing that, and all these other drugs. And look, the patients don't get better. And in fact, if you look at this figure here, they never get better. The oxygens never come up. In Nigeria, they gave ivermectin, ivermectin, vitamin C, and zinc. Better in 7 to 8 days. Sabine has done in Malibu. Ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc, 24 hours. Patients do not require hospital. Oxygen saturations are up. We have to understand that COVID and Marburg and all these RNA viruses are diseases of the blood and the microvasculature. Tim McCulloch showed us viral proliferation stage, cytokine injury stage, thrombosis stage, treat each stage. Risk stratify your patients, young, healthy patients full of vitamin D, eating well, probably can have vitamin D, C, and zinc. If you're smoking hypertensive with 3 previous heart attacks, you need to go down into maximum treatment through all stages. I'm not going to go through all of that. And sequence multi-drug therapy protocols have been used in Zimbabwe effectively since 2020, but we probably got them right in about 2021. And the result was that we call it the SIDS protocol. And the result was that WHO got this result, Nigeria got that result, and Zimbabwe and Malibu got that result. And I'm afraid all the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We need results-based protocols. So I'm going to flick through quite a few slides without going through things in too much detail, but just to reiterate, Ebola uses exactly the same replication mechanism as SARS-CoV-2. So does Marburg. We know how to switch it off. Nanosilver, ivermectin, zinc, it's ionophores. They at every single stage. If there's lots of zinc in the cell, which you can see here, there's lots of zinc here, there's no RNA polymerase. This virus can't replicate. You've taken it out. Remind you, your zinc ionophores are hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine. Ivermectin and doxy were shown to be the most effective against COVID. We might find that a different combination works with this, but if we don't know, we won't try. And I can tell you now that most of these drugs are available over the counter in Africa. And if the patients are being told to get a vaccination, or they can go to their friendly local traditional healer and pharmacist and get medications that they know will work, I can tell you which one they're more likely to go for. There's a systemic spread phase. We stop that with the drugs the antivirals I've just talked about. There's a viral glycoprotein, we can coat it. The viral glycoproteins in Ebola and in SARS-CoV-2 and in Marburg are the same. They're like a triple fishing hook. They cause the blood to coagulate. What can you do? Coat them with ivermectin and with silver. So it's not actually very scary at all. People have said, oh, but the glycoproteins are 2 to 5 nanometers in size instead of 10 nanometers in size. It doesn't matter. We just use a 2 to 5 nanometer size silver nanoparticle. We know that cytokines are suppressed heavily by silver. Look at that in the middle. You've got a 5-fold decrease in interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha, both of which cause the cytokine storm. The dexamethasone had a 20% decrease, and the whole world went crazy everywhere. So without getting into too much further, I'm just going to go through one thing more about Africa. Let's talk about some real-world evidence in Sierra Leone. Ebola, 2014. The world's coming to a grinding end. We're all going to die. 40 to 50% mortality rate, okay? Except Sierra Leone had a 21.7% mortality rate. Thanks to somebody called Alpha Kanu, who's a trained chemist, who was sent to grow a lot of silver, and the FDA did whatever was in their power to stop it. That landed in Sierra Leone, and we're not too sure exactly what else happened, although the president got into the tussle with the bureaucrats to say, you cannot stop this from coming here. And as a result, they halved the mortality rate with silver alone. And if we look at ivermectin, we know that it works in Marburg. It is a completely safe drug. There is no reason not to use it. What's the worst thing that can happen? We're going to have a population of parasite-free patients. And we know that for silver, our diarrhea does not affect dark-skinned people. So,
what's Agaria? Sorry, Jackie, what's Agaria?
Our diarrhea, it is the side effect of silver where your skin turns blue. Everybody, every time anybody says people should use silver, you will be warned that your skin will turn blue. You need to take 10 grams of it, and you're inhaling about 5 micro. You basically take about 20,000 doses to turn blue. So you'll have to nebulize for the rest of your life. And you won't go blue if you've got dark skin because all that will happen is your skin will go slightly darker. So
And is that 10 grams a day?
Sorry?
Is that 10 grams a day?
You have to take a total of 10 grams. It'll take you about 10 years to take it if you're taking it in a colloidal or a nanosilver form. You couldn't take it in a day. If you ate it in a day, it would pass through you. And you would just excrete it. So, if we're looking at economic collapse in Africa, which will happen if we go back into quarantine, lockdown, and we wait for a new vaccine that is completely untested. We already know from the Kenyan vaccination rollout in 2014, where they vaccinated everybody with tetanus that had HCG against it, that they got a 40% infertility rate. People in Africa, I don't think, are going to particularly want any more vaccines where we don't know what's in them in Africa, particularly when we know that we have multiple ways that we can treat this virus. I didn't even get to the how to stop the clotting phase, which is aspirin, some of the pharmaceuticals like Xarelto and enoxaparin, some of the naturals like nattokinase and serrapeptase. And all of those things are available here. Incidentally, in dengue in South America and Asia, pawpaw leaf extract in the end stages saves huge amounts of people. And there's several papers which will show that pawpaw leaf extract brings the platelets up and the patients don't bleed to death. In November of this year, we sent a protocol which included silver ivermectin and doxycycline. Incidentally, doxycycline given to Ebola rats results in a drop in the death rate from 80% to 40%. So a 50% decrease in mortality with doxy alone. If we add silver, there's another 50% decrease in mortality.
And doxycycline is a broad spectrum antibiotic, yes?
It isn't actually. Well, it is and it isn't.
Oh.
It is a broad spectrum antimicrobial. So for a piece of genetic material to make protein, it has to go through a ribosome. Doxycycline blocks the ribosome. So if you're a virus with a piece of genetic material, doxycycline won't let you make proteins out of it. If you're a bacteria with genetic material, doxycycline won't let you make proteins out of it. If you are a malaria parasite, you have the same problem. It basically, at a very, very right down at the bottom basic level, shuts down protein production from genetic material. It also is a zinc ionophore, so it puts a lot of zinc into the cell. So when we remember that the photocopying machine that makes more and more RNA requires, or it is inhibited by zinc, doxy puts lots of zinc into cells. And doxy is a bit like a shotgun, I mean, something like ceftriaxone is a sniper rifle. You're going to shoot meningococcal meningitis with your ceftriaxone. If you shoot with doxycycline, everything dies. I hope, apart from the patient, usually, which is handy. But it is seen, we've got to get away from this labeling of drugs. Ivermectin is labeled as an antiparasitic. Ivermectin has been known as an antiviral as a secondary use since 2010, 2014. But it costs so much money to relabel it with the pharmaceutical companies that most doctors say, right, it's safe. It's been through all the safety trials. We know it works. So we will use it as an antiviral. I use doxycycline extensively in malaria patients. And it's an antibiotic, but it's on every protocol to be used in conjunction with other medications as an antimalarial. So One thing COVID seems to have tried to do is say, this is an anti-parasitic. You may not use it for anything else. Well, that's just the most bizarre way of thinking if you understand the mechanisms of action of the drug. If the drug is going to shut down the assembly of proteins from RNA, like doxy does, then it will work against viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites, and cancer. Doxy and vitamin C together shut down the production of proteins from mRNA, which is how cancer replicates. So there's a massive push against a lot of these drugs for a lot of reasons, because the cancer industry, the infectious disease industry, the vaccine industry do not want stuff that is going to cost $30, $40 a day. Sorry, $30, $40 a course, and keep the patient out of hospital. That is widely available, particularly all over this continent. So I guess the message is that the only thing there is to fear is fear itself. Marburg virus is a lot less infectious than COVID was. We have had a little pilot project in Uganda where we sent up a specific protocol, which included all your immune boosters, CD zinc. It included N-acetylcysteine, which gives you a lot of sulfur, and it is an antioxidant that will stop a cytokine storm. It included the silver ivermectin doxycycline, and it included pawpaw leaf. And on the 11th of January this year, 2023, Uganda mysteriously vanished due to the WHO's brilliant containment measures in Uganda this year. So we're moving towards a world where we're going to go ahead and the people are going to treat themselves.
What disease was that you were just talking about in Uganda? Ebola, okay.
So our interest in Zimbabwe, and I think I may have said this on the recording or not, but our interest in Zimbabwe is that every time Emirates puts out there is Ebola or Marburg in Equatorial Guinea and Uganda, every tourist cancels their flight to Africa, and it decimates our tourist industry, which they pretty much nearly collapsed over COVID. So we have a very, very strong and vested interest in countries who have a lot of tourism and where there's a lot of conservation of endangered species, that the tourists continue to come out. And this kind of behavior, this fear-mongering nonsense, for want of a better word, will collapse our tourism industry. And it's nonsense because it's not a highly transmittable virus, and we know how to treat it. And it's not this big boogie monster bleeding out your eyes, ears, and nose, and there's nothing anybody can do it that the WHO and the rest of the world painted to be. You know, 400 children die every single month in this country from TB as a result of poorly controlled HIV. We haven't had a single death from COVID. Marburg is so far away, it's not even funny. And yet everybody's getting hysterical and putting all their money into vaccinating against something where we've got to vaccinate 46 million children to prevent one death. Who's behind this? And that's a pun that's totally intended.
So are you talking about Zimbabwe? 400 children die a month in Zimbabwe?
Let me rephrase that. 400 young people with HIV die from TB because of poor access to drugs, because of poor access to HIV services, and we can thank lockdowns and economic disasters that resulted for those deaths. So not only are they neglected because all the money is being spent on COVID vaccines, they are also, they basically, in 2021 alone, we added 3 million people to our extreme poor because of lockdowns in a country of 14 million. So we've got malnutrition on top of that. There are much bigger priorities than 4 cases of Marburg that's going to shut down our tourist industry even further and put another million into the extreme.
We've got 4 minutes left. So can I just ask you a couple of questions?
Hundreds.
How can you tell me how much silver, how much zinc, how much doxy you need to treat a case of Marburg, approximately? I'm sure it'll be different in each patient, or maybe not.
What I'll do is I will send you a link, which you can add to it, which gives the protocol we used in COVID. We just used the same protocol in Uganda. All the dosaging is there.
And just to be clear, when you were talking about the 400 young, that's in Zimbabwe, yes?
Yes. In Zimbabwe, we're losing probably 400 people a month to TB and HIV. TB as a result of HIV that's poorly controlled.
And do you know how many to malnutrition?
I don't want to even think. It would break my heart. But I will say that when we had our so-called measles outbreak, 72 children died. Only 2 died in hospital, which suggests that the rest died in abject poverty in the middle of nowhere. So they rolled out a measles vaccine in all the healthy children in Harare and did nothing about the starving in the rural areas. So it makes absolutely no sense to me what's going on unless somebody's making a lot of money out of vaccines, or the vaccines have another agenda, which, as you know, Kenya thinks is depopulation.
Well, interestingly, the World Health Organization and the UK Health Security Agency both say that clean water offers better protection than vaccination on any disease.
So does food.
And food, obviously. Food we know, food and clean water and better housing we know was behind the reduction in infectious disease in the West. We know that. So it would follow that the same would happen in Africa. And weirdly, Bill Gates started out his philanthropic journey by wanting everyone to have access to clean water, but changed, and we don't really know why.
Well, my last slide is on the screen. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Have a little read of what I think Bill Gates is interested in Africa.
That is, I love that. I want that as a badge.
And unfortunately, all us pesky Africans won't die and get off the continent. So we need to be injected and sterilized so that they can turn the whole place into an open pit mine for their lithium and their gold and their platinum for all the artificial intelligences. The Congo could grow enough food for the world with its rainfall. So Africa is not poor little old Africa. Africa needs to be kept in its place with donations from WHO so that we continually believe that we are inferior and we need them.